Okay, test, test, test. Okay, I think that should be working now. Okay, I do apologize for the delay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. We are going to be chilling out, just reading The Alchemist. I will be putting a little something on screen, hopefully to keep you entertained while I'm reading. I was messing around with a little something earlier. Let's see if it's worked. I don't think it has. Oh, maybe it has. Let's have a look. No, it didn't work. Alright, apologies. So what I'll have to do is I will do plan B. Welcome back to another DamansGoldenDragon stream. Typical. But it is what it is. It is what it is. Alright, so Alright, so I can't seem to find a nice picture. Let's just go with this one. Now my computer's broken. Oh, I love this. At least the day's never boring here. The day's never boring here at DamansGoldenDragon. Let's call this boy. Boy. We'll call it boy. Hey, boy. Okay. Add an image, create new. Don't you guys love the behind the scenes? Watching me struggle. If this is called struggling. I don't think this is actual struggle. Sure, people who've been through struggles will be like, bruh, seriously, bruh. Alright, here we go. Let's just stick that in the middle. There we go. That will be the little image while I read the book. I was trying to get a moving image or some kind of video, but it did not work as I had planned. But it's okay, because we go with the flow here. We roll with the punches. So, beautiful, 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 beautiful. Hope you guys are having a beautiful day. We're going to carry on with The Alchemist. I don't remember exactly where I left off, but my little wheat bookmark showed me the general area, so I'm just going to start from the top of the page. Might be reading a little bit of what I read previously, but it's fine because it's a great book. It's a fantastic book. Now let me get a little bit comfortable. Or wet the whistle, or wet the old whistle. Alrighty, let's get crack-a-lacking. The boy was awake as the sun rose. There in front of him, where the small stars had been the night before, was an endless row of date palms, stretching across the entire desert. "We've done it," said the Englishman, who had also awakened early. But the boy was quiet. He was at home with the silence of the desert, and he was content just to look at the trees. He still had a long way to reach the pyramids, and someday this morning would just be a memory. But this was the present moment. The party the camel driver had mentioned, and he wanted to live it as though, and he wanted to live it as he did the lessons of his past and his dreams of the future. Although the vision of the date palms would someday be just a memory, right now it signified shade, water, and a refuge from war. Yesterday the camel's groan signaled danger, and now a row of date palms could herald a miracle. The world speaks many languages, the boy thought. The times rush past, and so do the caravans, thought the alchemist, as he watched the hundreds of people and animals arriving at the oasis. People were shouting at the new arrivals. Dust obscured the desert sun, and the children of the oasis were bursting with excitement at the arrival of the strangers. The alchemist saw the tribal chiefs greet the leader of the caravan and converse with him at length. But none of that mattered to the alchemist. He had already seen many people come and go, and the desert remained as it was. He had seen kings and beggars walking in the desert. The dunes were changed constantly by the wind, yet these were the same sands he had known since he was a child. He always enjoyed seeing the happiness that the travellers experienced when, after weeks of yellow sand and blue sky, they first saw the green of the date palms. Maybe God created the desert so that man could appreciate the date trees, he thought. He decided to concentrate on more practical matters. He knew that in the caravan that there was a man to whom he had to teach some of his secrets. The omens had told him so. He didn't know the man yet, but his practiced eye would recognize him when he appeared. He hoped that it would be someone as capable as his previous apprentice. I don't know why these things have to be transmitted by word of mouth, he thought. It wasn't exactly that they were secrets. God revealed his secrets easily to all his creatures. He had only one explanation for this fact. Things have to be transmitted this way because they were made up from pure life, and this kind of life cannot be captured in pictures or words, because people become fascinated with pictures and words and wind up forgetting the language of the world. The boy couldn't believe what he was seeing. The oasis, rather than being just a well surrounded by a few palm trees, as he had seen once in a geography book, was much larger than many towns back in Spain. There were 300 wells, 50,000 date trees, and an innumerable coloured tents spread among them. It looks like 1,001 nights, said the Englishman, impatient to meet with the alchemist. They were surrounded by children, curious to look at the animals and the people that were arriving. The men of the oasis wanted to know if they had seen any fighting, and the women competed with one another for access to cloth and precious stones brought by the merchants. The silence of the desert was a distant dream. The travellers in the caravan were talking incessantly, laughing and shouting, as if they had emerged from a spiritual world and found themselves once again in the world of the people. They were relieved and happy. They had been taking careful precautions in the desert, but the camel driver explained to the boy that the oases were always considered to be neutral territories, because the majority of the inhabitants were women and children. There were oases throughout the desert, but the tribesmen fought in the desert, leaving the oasis as places of refuge. With some difficulty, the leader of the caravan brought all his people together and gave them his instructions. The group was to remain there at the oasis until the conflict between the tribes was over. Since they were visitors, they would have to share living space with those who lived there, and would be given the best accommodations. This was the law of hospitality. Then he asked that everyone, including his own sentinels, hand over their arms to the men appointed by the tribal chieftains. Those are the rules of war, the leader explained. The oasis may not shelter armies or troops. To the boy's surprise, the Englishman took a chrome-plated revolver out of his bag and gave it to the men who were collecting the arms. Why a revolver? He asked. It helped me to trust in people, the Englishman answered. Meanwhile, the boy thought about his treasure. The closer he got to the realization of his dream, the more difficult things became. It seemed as if what the old king had called beginner's luck were no longer functioning. In his pursuit of the dream, he was being constantly subjected to tests of his persistence and courage, so he could not be hasty nor impatient. If he pushed forward impulsively, he would fail to see the signs and omens left by God along his path. God placed them along my path. He had surprised himself with the thought. Until then, he had considered the omens to be things of the world, like eating or sleeping, or like seeking love or finding a job. He had never thought of them in terms of language used by God to indicate what he should do. Don't be impatient, he repeated to himself. It's like the camel driver said, eat when it's time to eat, and move along when it's time to move along. That first day, everyone slept from exhaustion, including the Englishman. The boy was assigned a place far from his friend, in a tent with five other young men of about his age. They were people of the desert and clamored to hear this English hard. They were people of the desert and clamored to hear his stories about the great cities. The boy told them about his life as a shepherd and was about to tell them of his experiences at the crystal shop when the Englishman came into the tent. "I've been looking for you all morning," he said. He led the boy outside. "I need you to help me find out where the alchemist lives." First, they tried to find him on their own. An alchemist would probably live in a manner that was different from that of the rest of the people at the oasis, and it was likely that in his tent an oven was continuously burning. They searched everywhere and found that the oasis was much larger than they could have imagined. There were hundreds of tents. We've wasted almost the entire day," said the Englishman, sitting down with the boy near one of the wells. "Maybe we'd better ask someone," the boy suggested. The Englishman didn't want to tell others about his reasons for being at the oasis, and couldn't make up his mind. But finally he agreed that the boy, who spoke better Arabic than he, should do so. The boy approached a woman who had come to the well to fill a goatskin with water. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm trying to find out where the alchemist lives here at the oasis." The woman said she had never heard of such a person and hurried away. But before she fled, she advised the boy that he had better not try to converse with women who were dressed in black, because they were married women. He should respect the tradition. The Englishman was disappointed. He seemed he had made the long journey for nothing. The boy was also saddened. His friend was in pursuit of his personal legend. And when someone is in such pursuit, the entire universe made an effort to help him succeed. That's what the old king had said. He couldn't have been wrong. "I had never heard of alchemists before," the boy said. "Maybe no one here has either." The Englishman's eyes lit up. "That's it! Maybe no one here knows what an alchemist is. Find out who it is that cures people of all their illnesses." Several women dressed in black came to the well for water, but the boy would not speak to none of them, despite the Englishman's insistence. Then a man approached. "Do you know someone here who cures people's illnesses?" the boy asked. "Allah cures our illnesses," said the man, clearly frightened at the strangers. "You're looking for witch doctors." He spoke some verses from the Quran and moved on. Another man appeared. He was older and was carrying a small bucket. The boy repeated his question. "Why do you want to find that sort of person?" the Arab asked. "Because my friend here has travelled for many months in order to meet with him," the boy said. "If such a man is here at the oasis, he must be a very powerful one," said the old man after thinking for a few moments. "Not even the tribal chieftains are able to see him when they want to, only when he consents. Wait for the end of the war, then leave with the caravan. Don't try to enter into the life of the oasis," he said, and walked away. But the Englishman was exultant. They were on the right track. Finally, a young woman approached who was not dressed in black. She had a vessel on her shoulder, and her head was covered by a veil, but her face was uncovered. The boy approached her to ask her about the alchemist. At that moment, it seemed to him that time stood still, and the soul of the world surged within him. When he looked into her dark eyes and saw that her lips were poised between a laugh and a silence, he learned the most important part of the language that all the world spoke, the language that everyone on earth was capable of understanding in their heart. It was love. Something older than humanity, more ancient than the desert, something that exerted the same force whenever two pairs of eyes met, as had theirs here at the well. She smiled, and that was certainly an omen. The omen he had been waiting, even without knowing he was, for all his life. The omen he had sought to find with his sheep in his books, in the crystals and in the silence of the desert. It was the pure language of the world. It required no explanation, just as the universe needs none as it travels through endless time. What the boy felt at that moment was that he was in the presence of the only woman in his life, and that with no need for words, she recognized the same thing. He was more certain of it than anything in the world. He had been told by his parents and grandparents that he must fall in love and really know a person before becoming committed. But maybe people who felt that way never had learned the universal language. Because when you know that language, it's easy to understand that someone in the world awaits you, whether it's in the middle of the desert or in some great city. And when two such people encounter each other and their eyes meet, the past and the future become unimportant. There is only that moment, and the incredible certainty that everything under the sun has been written by one hand only. It is the hand that evokes love and creates a twin soul for every person in the world. Without such love, one's dreams would have no meaning. Maktub, thought the boy. The Englishman shook the boy. Come on, ask her. The boy stepped closer to the girl, and when she smiled, he did the same. What's your name? He asked. Fatima, the girl said, averting her eyes. That's what some women in my country are called. It's the name of the Prophet's daughter, Fatima said. The invaders carried the name everywhere. The beautiful girl spoke of the invaders with pride. The Englishman prodded him, and the boy asked her about the man who cured people's illnesses. That's the man who knows all the secrets of the world, she said. He communicates with the genies of the desert. The genies were the spirits of good and evil, and the girl pointed to the south, indicating that it was there that a strange man lived. Then she filled her vessel with water and left. The Englishman vanished too, gone to find the alchemist. And the boy sat there by the well for a long time, remembering that one day in Tarifa, the Levanter had brought to him the perfume of that woman, and realizing that he had loved her before he even knew she existed. He knew that his love for her would enable him to discover every treasure in the world. The next day, the boy returned to the well, hoping to see the girl. To his surprise, the Englishman was there, looking out at the desert. I waited all afternoon and evening, he said. He appeared with the first stars of the evening. I told him what I was seeking, and he asked me if I had ever transformed lead into gold. I told him that was what I had come here to learn. He told me I should go try to do so. That's all he said. Go and try. The boy didn't say anything. The poor Englishman had travelled all this way only to be told he should repeat what he had already done so many times. So then try, he said to the Englishman. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start now. As the Englishman left, Fatima arrived and filled her vessel with water. I came to tell you just one thing, the boy said. I want you to be my wife. I love you. The girl dropped the container, and the water spilled. I'm going to wait here for you every day. I have crossed the desert in search of a treasure that is somewhere near the pyramids. And for me, this war seemed a curse. But now it's a blessing because it brought me to you. The war is going to end someday, the girl said. The boy looked around him at the date palms. He reminded himself that he had been a shepherd and that he could be a shepherd again. Fatima was more important than his treasure. The tribesmen are always in search of treasure, the girl said, as if she had guessed what he was thinking. And the women of the desert are proud of the tribesmen. She refilled her vessel and left. The boy went to the well every day to meet with Fatima. He told her about his life as a shepherd, about the king, and about the crystal shop. They became friends, and except for the 15 minutes he spent with her, each day seemed that it would never pass. When he had been at the oasis for almost a month, the leader of the caravan called a meeting of all the people travelling with him. We don't know when the war will end, so we can't continue our journey, he said. The battles may last for a long time, perhaps even years. There are powerful forces on both sides, and the war is important to both armies. It's not a battle of good against evil. It's a war between forces that are fighting for the balance of power. And when that type of battle begins, it lasts longer than others, because Allah is on both sides. The people went back to where they were living, and the boy went to meet Fatima that afternoon. He told her about the morning's meeting. The day after we met, Fatima said, you told me you loved me. Then you taught me something of the universal language and the soul of the world. Because of that, I have become a part of you. The boy listened to the sound of her voice and thought it to be more beautiful than the sound of the wind in the date palms. I have been waiting for you here at the oasis for a long time. I have forgotten about my past, about my traditions, and the way in which men of the desert expect women to behave. Ever since I was a child, I have dreamed that the desert would bring me a wonderful present. Now my present has arrived, and it's you. The boy wanted to take her hand, but Fatima's hands held to the handles of her jug. You have told me about your dreams, about the old king and your treasure, and you've told me about the omens. So now I fear nothing, because it was those omens that brought you to me, and I am part of your dream, a part of your personal legend, as you call it. That's why I want you to continue toward your goal. If you have to wait until the war is over, then wait. But if you have to go before then, go on in pursuit of your dream. The dunes are changed by the wind, but the desert never changes. That's the way it will be with our love for each other. Maktub, she said. If I am really part of your dream, you'll come back one day. The boy was sad as he left her that day. He thought of all the married shepherds he had known. They had a difficult time convincing their wives that they had to go off into distant fields. Love required them to stay with the people they loved. He told Fatima that, at their next meeting, the desert takes our men from us, and they don't always return, she said. We know that and we are used to it. Those who don't return become a part of the clouds, a part of the animals that hide in the ravines of the water that comes from the earth. They become a part of everything. They become the soul of the world. Some do come back, and then the other women are happy because they believe that their men may one day return as well. I used to look at those women and envied them their happiness. Now I too shall be one of those women who wait. I am a desert woman, and I am proud of that. I want my husband to wander as free as the wind that shapes the dunes, and if I have to, I will accept the fact that he has become part of the clouds, the animals, and the water of the desert. The boy went to look for the Englishman. He wanted to tell him about Fatima. He was surprised when he saw that the Englishman had built himself a furnace outside his tent. It was a strange furnace, fueled by firewood, with a transparent flask heating on top. As the Englishman stared out at the desert, his eyes seemed brighter than they had when he was reading his books. This is the first phase of the job, he said. I have to separate out the sulfur. To do that successfully, I must have no fear of failure. It was my fear of failure that first kept me from attempting the masterwork. Now I'm beginning what I could have started 10 years ago, but I'm happy at least that I didn't wait 20 years. He continued to feed the fire, and the boy stayed on until the desert turned pink in the setting sun. He felt the urge to go out into the desert, to see if the silence held the answers to his questions. He wandered for a while, keeping the date palms of the oasis within sight. He listened to the wind and felt the stones beneath his feet. Here and there he found a shell, and realized that the desert in remote times had been a sea. He sat on a stone and allowed himself to become hypnotized by the horizon. He tried to deal with the concept of love as distinct from possession, and couldn't separate them. But Fatima was a woman of the desert, and if anything could help him to understand, it was the desert. As he sat there thinking, he sensed movement above him. Looking up, he saw a pair of hawks flying high in the sky. He watched the hawks as they drifted on the wind. Although although their flight appeared to have no pattern, it made a certain kind of sense to the boy. It was just that he couldn't grasp what it meant. He followed the movement of the birds, trying to read something into it. Maybe these desert birds could explain to him the meaning of love without ownership. He felt sleepy. In his heart, he wanted to remain awake, but he also wanted to sleep. I am learning the language of the world, and everything in the world is beginning to make sense to me. Even the flight of the hawks, he said to himself. And in that mood, he was grateful to be in love. When you are in love, things make more sense, he thought. Suddenly, one of the hawks made a flashing dive through the sky, attacking the other. As it did so, a sudden fleeting image came to the boy, an army with its sword at the ready, riding into the oasis. The vision vanished immediately, but it had shaken him. He had heard people speak of mirages, and had already seen some himself. They were desires that, because of their intensity, materialized over the sands of the desert. But he certainly didn't desire that an army invade the oasis. He wanted to forget about the vision and return to his meditation. He tried again to concentrate on the pink shades of the desert and its stones, but there was something there in his heart that wouldn't allow him to do so. Always heed the omens, the old king had said. The boy recalled what he had seen in the vision and sensed that it was actually going to occur. He rose and made his way back toward the palm trees. Once again he perceived the many languages and the things about him. This time the desert was safe, and it was the oasis that had become dangerous. The camel driver was seated at the base of the palm tree, observing the sunset. He saw the boy appear from the other side of the dunes. "An army is coming," the boy said. "I had a vision." "The desert fills men's hearts with visions," the camel driver answered. But the boy told him about the hawks, that he had been watching their flight and had suddenly felt himself to have plunged into the soul of the world. The camel driver understood what the boy was saying. He knew that any given thing on the face of the earth could reveal the history of all things. One can open a book to any page or look at a person's hand. One could turn a card or watch the flight of the birds. Whatever the thing observed, one could find a connection with his experience of that moment. Actually, it wasn't that those things in themselves revealed anything at all. It was just that people, looking at what was occurring around them, could find means of penetration to the soul of the world. The desert was full of men who earned their living, based on the ease with which they could penetrate to the soul of the world. They were known as seers, and they were held in fear by women and the elderly. Tribesmen who were also wary of consulting them, because it would be impossible to be effective in battle if one knew that he was fated to die. The tribesmen preferred the taste of battle, and the thrill of not knowing what the outcome would be. The future was already written by Allah, and what he had written was always for the good of man. So the tribesmen lived only for the present, because the present was full of surprises, and they had to be aware of many things. Where was the enemy's sword? Where was his horse? What kind of blow should one deliver next in order to remain alive? The camel driver was not a fighter, and he had consulted with seers. Many of them had been right about what they had said, while some had been wrong. Then one day, the oldest seer he had ever sought out, and the one who was to be most feared, had asked why the camel driver was so interested in the future. "Well, so I can do things," he had responded, "and so I can change those things that I don't want to happen." "But then they wouldn't be part of your future," the seer had said. "Well, maybe I just want to know the future so I can prepare myself for what's coming." "If good things are coming, they will be a pleasant surprise," said the seer. "If bad things are coming, and you know in advance, you will suffer greatly before they even occur." "I want to know about the futures because I'm a man," the camel driver had said to the seer, "and men always live their lives based on the future." The seer was a specialist in the casting of twigs. He threw them on the ground and made interpretations based on how they fell. That day he didn't make a cast. He wrapped the twigs in a piece of cloth and put them back in his bag. I make my living forecasting the future for people, he said. And I know the science of the twigs, and I know how to use them to penetrate to the world, to a place where all is written. There I can read the past, discover what has already been forgotten, and understand the omens that are here in the present. When people consult me, it's not that I am reading the future. I am guessing at the future. The future belongs to God, and it is only He who reveals it, under extraordinary circumstances. How do I guess the future? Based on the omens of the present. The secret is here in the present. If you pay attention to the present, you can improve upon it. And if you improve upon the present, what comes later will also be better. Forget about the future, and live each day according to the teachings, confident that God loves His children. Each day in itself brings with it an eternity. The camel driver had to ask what the circumstances were under which God would allow him to see the future. Only when He Himself reveals it, and God only really reveals the future. When He does so, it is only for one reason. It's a future that was written so as to be altered. God had shown the boy a part of the future, the camel driver thought. Why was it that He wanted the boy to serve as His instrument? Go and speak to the tribal chieftains, said the camel driver. Tell them about the armies that are approaching. They'll laugh at me, said the boy. They are men of the desert, and men of the desert are used to dealing with omens. Well, then they probably already know, said the boy. They're not concerned with that right now. They believe that if they have to know something Allah wants them to know, someone will tell them about it. It has happened many times before, but this time, the person is you. The boy thought of Fatima, and he decided he would go to see the chiefs of the tribes. The boy approached the guard at the front of the huge white tent at the center of the oasis. I want to see the chieftains. I've brought omens from the desert. Without responding, the guard entered the tent, where he remained for some time. When he emerged, it was with the young Arab dressed in white and gold. The boy told the younger man what he had seen, and the man asked him to wait there. He disappeared into the tent. Night fell, and an assortment of fighting men and merchants entered and exited the tent. One by one, the campfires were extinguished, and the oasis fell as quiet as the desert. Only the lights in the great tent remained. During all this time, the boy thought about Fatima, and he was still unable to understand his last conversation with her. Finally, after hours of waiting, the guard bade the boy enter. The boy was astonished by what he saw inside. Never could he have imagined that in the middle of the desert, there existed a tent like this one. The ground was covered with the most beautiful carpets he had ever walked upon, and from the top of the structure hung lamps of hand-wrought gold, each with a lighted candle. The tribal chieftains were seated at the back of the tent in a semicircle, resting upon richly embroidered silk cushions. Servants came and went with silver trays laden with spices and tea. Other servants maintained the fires in the hookahs. The atmosphere was suffused with the sweet scent of smoke. There were 8 chieftains, but the boy could see immediately which of them was the most important. An Arab dressed in white and gold, seated at the center of the semicircle. At his side was the young Arab, the boy he had spoken with earlier. "Who is this stranger who speaks of omens?" asked one of the chieftains, eyeing the boy. "It is I," the boy answered, and he told what he had seen. "Why would the desert reveal such things to a stranger, when it knows that we have been here for generations?" said another of the chieftains. "Because my eyes are not yet accustomed to the desert," the boy said. "I can see things that eyes habituated to the desert might not see. And also because I know about the soul of the world," he thought to himself. "The oasis is neutral ground. No one attacks an oasis," said a third chieftain. "I can only tell you what I saw. If you don't want to believe me, you don't have to do anything about it. The men fell into an animated discussion. They spoke in an Arabic dialect that the boy didn't understand. But when he made to leave, the guard told him to stay. The boy became fearful. The omens told him something was wrong. He regretted having spoken to the camel driver about what he had seen in the desert. Suddenly, the elder at the center smiled, almost imperceptibly, and the boy felt better. The man hadn't participated in the discussion, and in fact, hadn't said a word up to that point. But the boy was already used to the language of the world, and he could feel the vibration of peace throughout the tent. Now his intuition was that he had been right in coming. The discussion ended. The chieftains were silent for a few moments as they listened to what the old man was saying. Then he turned to the boy. This time his expression was cold and distant. 2,000 years ago, in a distant land, a man who believed in dreams was thrown into a dungeon, and then sold as a slave, the old man said, now in the dialect that the boy understood. Our merchants brought that man, and brought him to Egypt. All of us know that whoever believes in dreams also knows how to interpret them. The elder continued, when the Pharaoh dreamed of cows that were thin and cows that were fat, this man I'm speaking of rescued Egypt from famine. His name was Joseph. He too was a stranger in a strange land, like you, and he was probably about your age. He paused, and his eyes were still unfriendly. We always observe the tradition. The tradition saved Egypt from the famine in those days and made the Egyptians the wealthiest of peoples. The tradition teaches men how to cross the desert and how the children should marry. The tradition says that an oasis is neutral territory because both sides have oases, and so both are vulnerable. No one said a word as the old man continued. But the tradition also says that we should believe the messages of the desert. Everything we know was taught to us by the desert. The old man gave a signal, and everyone stood. The meeting was over, the hookahs were extinguished, and the guard stood at attention. The boy made ready to leave, but the old man spoke again. Tomorrow, we are going to break the agreement that says no one at the oasis may carry arms. Throughout the entire day, we will be on lookout for our enemies. When the sun sets, the men will once again surrender their arms to me. For every 10 dead among our enemies, you will receive a piece of gold. But arms cannot be drawn unless they also go into battle. Arms are as English hard. Arms are as capricious. Arms are as capricious as the desert, and if they are not used, the next time they might not function. If at least one of them hasn't been used at the end of the day tomorrow, one will be used on you. When the boy left the tent, the oasis was illuminated by only one light of the full moon. He was 20 minutes from his tent and began to make his way there. He was alarmed by what had happened. He had succeeded in reaching through to the soul of the world, and now the price for having done so might be his life. It was a frightening bet, but he had been making risky bets ever since the day he had sold his sheep to pursue his personal legend. And as the camel driver had said, to die tomorrow was no worse than dying on any other day. Every day there was to be lived or mark one's departure from this world. Everything depended on one word, maktub. Walking along in the silence, he had no regrets. If he died tomorrow, it would be because God was not willing to change the future. He would at least have died after having crossed the strait, after having worked in a crystal shop, after having known the silence of the desert and Fatima's eyes. He had lived every one of his days intensely since he had left his home so long ago. If he died tomorrow, he would already have seen more than other shepherds, and he was proud of that. Suddenly he heard a thundering sound, and he was thrown to the ground by a wind such as he had never known. The area was swirling in dust so intense that it hid the moon from view. Before him was an enormous white horse rearing over him with a frightening scream. When the blinding dust had settled a bit, the boy was trembled at what he saw. Astride the animal was a horseman, dressed completely in black, with a falcon perched on his left shoulder. He wore a turban, and his entire face, except for his eyes, was covered with a black kerchief. He appeared to be a messenger from the desert, but his presence was much more powerful than that of a mere messenger. The strange horseman drew an enormous curved sword from a scabbard mounted on his saddle. The steel of his blade glittered in the light of the moon. "Who dares to read the meaning of the flight of the hawks?" he demanded, so loudly that his words seemed to have echoed through the 50,000 palms of the Al-Fayoum. "It is I who dare to do so," said the boy. He was reminded of the image of Santiago Matamoras, mounted on his white horse, with the infidels beneath his hooves. This man looked exactly the same, except that now the roles were reversed. "It is I who dared to do so," he repeated, and he lowered his head to receive a blow from the sword. "Many lives will be saved because I was able to see through to the soul of the world." The sword didn't fall. Instead, the stranger lowered it slowly until the point touched the boy's forehead. It drew a droplet of blood. The horseman was completely immobile, as was the boy. It didn't even occur to the boy to flee. In his heart, he felt a strange sense of joy. He was about to die in pursuit of his personal legend, and for Fatima. The omens had been there, after all. The omens had been true after all. Here he was, face to face with his enemy, but there was no need to be concerned about dying. The soul of the world awaited him, and he would soon be a part of it. And tomorrow, his enemy would also be a part of that soul. The stranger continued to hold the sword at the boy's forehead. "Why did you read the flight of the birds?" "I read only what the birds wanted to tell me. They wanted to save the oasis. Tomorrow all of you will die, because there were more men at the oasis than you will have." The sword remained where it was. "Who are you to change what Allah has willed?" "Allah created the armies, and He also created the hawks. Allah taught me the language of the birds. Everything has been written by the same hand," the boy said, remembering the camel driver's words. The stranger withdrew the sword from the boy's forehead, and the boy felt immensely relieved, but he still couldn't flee. "Be careful with your this is a big word again. Be careful with your prognostications," said the stranger. "When something is written, there is no way to change it." "All I saw was an army," said the boy. "I didn't see the outcome of the battle." The stranger seemed satisfied with the answer, but he kept his sword in hand. "What is a stranger doing in a strange land?" "I am following my personal legend. It's not something you would understand." The stranger placed his sword in its scabbard, and the boy relaxed. "I had to test your courage," the stranger said. "Courage is the quality most essential to understanding the language of the world." The boy was surprised. The stranger was speaking of things that very few people knew about. "You must not let up, even after having come so far," he continued. "You must love the desert, but never trust it completely, because the desert tests all men. It challenges every step, and kills those who become distracted." What he had said reminded the boy of the old king. "If the warriors come here, and your head is still on your shoulders at sunset, come and find me," said the stranger. The same hand that had brandished the sword now held a whip. The horse reared again, raising a cloud of dust. "Where do you live?" the boy shouted, as the horseman rode away. The hand with the whip pointed to the south. The boy had met the alchemist. I'm going to take a little break here. Just allow myself to grab a drink and pop to the bathroom if I need to. And obviously, if you guys need anything as well, you're more than welcome to go. The stream is going to continue. I am enjoying reading this book. I love this book. Such a good book. In the meantime, I am going to play a song from one of the few different songs I've got at the moment. So enjoy the song while I come back from the bathroom break. Enjoy your bathroom break. See you guys in a minute. Okay, it doesn't look like the thingy's working. Sorry, bear with me just a moment. Audio. Why is it being so dodgy today? Let's go with... that one. Okay. Apologies for the delay. Nah, sorry, my thingy's not working at the properly at the moment. Some dodgy issues with the tech today. Someone's been doing some matrix attacks. Yeah, I can't get the music going. So in the meantime, I can't even play a video. Okay, so we're just gonna have to sit here in silence. Oh no, that's horrible. Well, I don't mind it. I like a bit of silence. Yeah, do you know what? Let's do a nice little change. We're gonna have a nice couple of minutes of silence. Let's put a "Be Right Back" on the screen. Be right back. There we go. Be right back. Alright, cool. So, yep, it's a bit of silence. Maybe you could use this silence to, like I said, go grab your tea, coffee, whatever, or reflect on the book so far. Yes, back in a couple of minutes. Enjoy the silence. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that nice little bit of quiet time just to reflect and think. So, where we left off, the boy had just met the alchemist, and he didn't realize it. Alright, let's continue. Next morning, there were 2,000 armed men scattered throughout the palm trees at the Al-Fayoum. Before the sun had reached its high point, 500 tribesmen appeared on the horizon. The mounted troops entered the oasis from the north. It appeared to be a peaceful expedition, but they all carried arms hidden in their robes. When they reached the white tents at the center of Al-Fayoum, they withdrew their scimitars and rifles, and they attacked an empty tent. The men of the oasis were surrounded, the horsemen from the desert, and within half an hour, all but one of the intruders were dead. The children had been kept at the other side of the grove of palm trees and saw nothing of what happened. The women had remained in their tents, praying for the safekeeping of their husbands, and saw nothing of the battle either. Were it not for the bodies on the ground, it would have appeared to be a normal day at the oasis. The only tribesman spared was the commander of the battalion. That afternoon he was brought before the tribal chieftains, who asked him why he had violated the tradition. The commander said that his men had been starving and thirsty, exhausted from many days of battle, and he had decided to take the oasis so as to be able to return to the war. The tribal chieftain said that he felt sorry for the tribesmen, but that the tradition was sacred. He condemned the commander to death without honor. Rather than being killed by a blade or a bullet, he was hanged from a dead palm tree, where his body twisted in the desert wind. The tribal chieftains called for the boy and presented him with 50 pieces of gold. He repeated his story about Joseph of Egypt, and then asked the boy to become the counselor of the oasis. When the sun had set and the first stars made their appearance, the boy started to walk to the south. He eventually sighted a single tent, and a group of Arabs passing by told the boy that it was a place inhabited by genies. But the boy sat down and waited. Not until the moon was high did the alchemist ride into view. He carried 2 dead hawks over his shoulder. "I am here," the boy said. "You shouldn't be here," the alchemist answered. "Or is it your personal legend that brings you here?" "With the wars between the tribes, it's impossible to cross the desert, so I have come here," the boy said. The alchemist dismounted from his horse and signaled that the boy should enter his tent with him. It was a tent like many at the oasis. The boy looked around for the ovens and the other apparatus used in alchemy, but saw none. There were only some books in a pile, and a small cooking stove, and the carpets covered with mysterious designs. "Sit down. We'll have something to drink and eat these hawks," said the alchemist. The boy suspected that they were the same hawks he had seen on the day before, but he had said nothing. The alchemist lighted the fire, and soon a delicious aroma filled the tent. It was better than the scent of the hookahs. "Why did you want to see me?" the boy asked. "Because of the omens," the alchemist answered. "The wind told me you would be coming, and that you would need help." "It's not I the wind spoke about, it's the other foreigner, the Englishman. He's the one that's looking for you. He has other things to do first, but he's on the right track. He has begun to try to understand the desert." "And what about me?" the boy asked. "When a person really desires something, all the universe conspires to help that person to realize his dream," said the alchemist, echoing the words of the old king. The boy understood. Another person was there to help him toward his personal legend. "So you're going to instruct me?" "No. You already know all you need to know. I am only going to point you in the direction of your treasure." "But there's a tribal war," the boy reiterated. "I know what's happening in the desert." I have already found my treasure. I have a camel, I have my money from the crystal shop, and I have 50 gold pieces. In my own country, I would be a rich man. But none of that is from the pyramids, said the alchemist. I also have Fatima. She is a treasure greater than anything else I have won. She wasn't found at the pyramids either. They ate in silence. The alchemist opened a bottle and poured a red liquid into the boy's cup. It was the most delicious wine he had ever tasted. Isn't wine prohibited here? The boy asked. It's not what enters men's mouth that is evil, said the alchemist. It's what comes out of their mouth that is. The alchemist was a bit daunting, but as the boy drank the wine, he relaxed. After they finished eating, they sat outside the tent under a moon so brilliant that it made the stars pale. Drink and enjoy yourself, said the alchemist, noticing that the boy was feeling happier. Rest well tonight, as if you were a warrior preparing for combat. Remember that wherever your heart is, there you will find your treasure. You've got to find the treasure so that everything you have learned along the way can make sense. Tomorrow, sell your camel and buy a horse. Camels are treacherous. They walk thousands of paces and never seem to tire. Then suddenly they kneel and die. But horses tire bit by bit. You always know how much you can ask of them, and when it is that they are about to die. The following night, the boy appeared at the alchemist's tent with a horse. The alchemist was ready, and he mounted his own steed and placed the falcon on his left shoulder. He said to the boy, "Show me where there is life out in the desert. Only those who can see such signs of life are able to find treasure." They began to ride over the sands, with the moon lighting their way. I don't know if I'll be able to find life in the desert, the boy thought. I don't know the desert that well yet. He wanted to say to the alchemist, but he was afraid of the man. They reached the rocky place where the boy had seen the hawks in the sky, but now there was only silence and the wind. I don't know how to find life in the desert, the boy said. I know that there is life here, but I don't know where to look. Life attracts life, the alchemist answered. And then the boy understood. He loosened the reins on his horse, who galloped forward over the rocks and sand. The alchemist followed as the boy's horse ran for almost half an hour. They could no longer see the palms of the oasis, only the gigantic moon above them, and its silver reflections from the stones of the desert. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, the boy's horse began to slow. "There's life here," the boy said to the alchemist. "I don't know the language of the desert, but my horse knows the language of life." They dismounted, and the alchemist said nothing. Advancing slowly, they searched among the stones. The alchemist stopped abruptly and bent to the ground. There was a hole there among the stones. The alchemist put his hand into the hole, and then his entire arm, up to his shoulder. Something was moving there, and the alchemist's eyes... The boy could see his eyes squinted with his effort. His arm seemed to be battling with whatever was in the hole. Then, with a motion that startled the boy, he withdrew his arm and leaped to his feet. In his hand, he grasped a snake by the tail. The boy leapt as well, but away from the alchemist. The snake fought frantically, making hissing sounds that shattered the silence of the desert. It was a cobra, whose venom could kill a person in minutes. "Watch out for his venom," the boy said. But even though the alchemist had put his hand in the hole, and had surely already been bitten, his expression was calm. "The alchemist is 200 years old," the Englishman had told him. "He must know how to deal with the snakes of the desert." The boy watched as his companion went to his horse and withdrew a scimitar. With its blade he drew a circle in the sand, and then he placed the snake within it. The serpent relaxed immediately. "Not to worry," said the alchemist. "He won't leave the circle. You found life in the desert, the omen that I needed." "Why was that so important?" the boy asked. "Because the pyramids are surrounded by the desert." The boy didn't want to talk about the pyramids. His heart was heavy, and he had been melancholy since the previous night. To continue his search for the treasure meant that he had to abandon Fatima. "I'm going to guide you across the desert," the alchemist said. I want to stay at the oasis, the boy answered. "I found Fatima, and as far as I'm concerned, she's worth more than treasure." "Fatima is a woman of the desert," said the alchemist. "She knows that men have to go away in order to return, and she already has her treasure. It's you. Now she expects that you will find what it is you're looking for." "Well, what if I decide to stay?" "Let me tell you what will happen. You will become the counselor of the oasis. You have enough gold to buy many sheep and many camels. You'll marry Fatima, and you'll both be happy for a year. You'll learn to love the desert, and you'll get to know every one of the 50,000 palms. You'll watch them as they grow, demonstrating how the world is always changing. And you'll get better and better at understanding omens, because the desert is the best teacher there is. Sometime during the second year, you'll remember about the treasure. The omens will begin to insistently to speak to you of it, and you'll try to ignore them. You'll use your knowledge for the welfare of the oasis and its inhabitants. The tribal chieftains will appreciate what you do, and your camels will bring you wealth and power. During the third year, the omens will continue to speak of your treasure and your personal legend. You'll walk around, night after night, at the oasis, and Fatima will be unhappy, because she'll feel it was she who interrupted your quest. But you will love her, and she will return your love. You'll remember that she never asked you to stay, because a woman of the desert that knows she must await her man. So you won't blame her. But many times you'll walk the sands of the desert, thinking that maybe you could have left, that you could have trusted more in your love for Fatima, because what kept you at the oasis was your own fear that you might never come back. At that point, the omens will tell you that your treasure is buried forever. Then sometime during the fourth year, the omens will abandon you. Because you've stopped listening to them, the tribal chieftains will see that, and you'll be dismissed from your position as counselor. But by then you'll be a rich merchant with many camels and a great deal of merchandise. You'll spend the rest of your days knowing that you didn't pursue your personal legend, and that now it's too late. You must understand that love never keeps a man from pursuing his personal legend. If he abandons that pursuit, it's because it wasn't true love. The love that speaks the language of the world. The alchemist erased the circle in the sand, and the snake slithered away among the rocks. The boy remembered the crystal merchant who had always wanted to go to Mecca, and the Englishman in search of the alchemist. He thought of the woman who had trusted in the desert, and he looked over the desert that had brought him to the woman he loved. They mounted their horses, and this time it was the boy who followed the alchemist back to the oasis. The wind brought the sounds of the oasis to them, and the boy tried to hear Fatima's voice. But that night, as he had watched the cobra within the circle, the strange horseman with the falcon on his shoulder had spoken of love and treasure, of the women of the desert and his personal legend. "I'm going with you," the boy said, and he immediately felt peace in his heart. "We'll leave tomorrow before sunrise," was the alchemist's only response. The boy spent a sleepless night. 2 hours before dawn, he awoke one of the other boys who slept in his tent, and asked him to show him where Fatima lived. They went to her tent, and the boy gave his friend enough gold to buy sheep. Then he asked his friend to go into the tent where Fatima was sleeping and to awaken her and to tell her that he was waiting outside. The young Arab did as he was asked, and was given enough gold to buy yet another sheep. "Now leave us alone," said the boy to the young Arab. The Arab returned to his tent to sleep, proud to have helped the councillor of the oasis, and happy at having enough money to buy himself some sheep. Fatima appeared at the entrance of the tent. The two walked out amongst the palms. The boy knew that it was a violation of the tradition, but that didn't matter to him anymore. "I'm going away," he said, "and I want you to know that I'm coming back. I love you because—" "Don't say anything," Fatima interrupted. "One is loved because one is loved. No reason is needed for loving." But the boy continued. "I had a dream, and I met with a king. I sold crystal and I crossed the desert, and because the tribes declared war, I went to the well, seeking the alchemist. So I love you because the entire universe conspired to help me find you." The two embraced. It was the first time either had touched the other. "I'll be back," the boy said. "Before this, I always looked to the desert with longing," said Fatima. "Now it will be with hope. My father went away one day, but he returned to my mother, and he has always come back since then." They said nothing else. They walked a bit further among the palms, and then the boy left her at the entrance to her tent. "I'll return just as your father came back to your mother," he said. He saw that Fatima's eyes were filled with tears. "You're crying." "I'm a woman of the desert," she said, averting her face. "But above all, I'm a woman." Fatima went back to her tent, and when daylight came, she went out to do the chores she had done for years. But everything had changed. The boy was no longer at the oasis, and the oasis would never have the same meaning it had only yesterday. It would no longer be a place with 50,000 palm trees and 300 wells where the pilgrims arrived, relieved at the end of their long journeys. From that day on, the oasis would be an empty place for her. From that day on, it was the desert that would be important. She would look at it every day, and would try to guess which star the boy was following in search of his treasure. She would have to send her kisses on the wind, hoping that the wind would touch the boy's face, and would tell him that she was still alive, that she was waiting for him, a woman awaiting a courageous man in search of his treasure. From that day on, the desert would represent only one thing to her: the hope for his return. "Don't think about what you've left behind," the alchemist said to the boy as they began to ride across the sands of the desert. "Everything is written in the soul of the world, and there it will stay forever. Men dream more about coming home than about leaving," the boy said. He was already reaccustomed to the desert silence. "If what one finds is made of pure matter, it will never spoil, and one can always come back. If what you had found was only a moment of light, like the explosion of a star, you would find nothing on your return." The man was speaking the language of alchemy, but the boy knew that he was referring to Fatima. It was difficult not to think about what he had left behind. The desert with its endless monotony put him to dreaming. The boy could still see the palm trees, the wells, the face of the woman he loved. He could see the Englishman at his experiments and the camel driver who was a teacher without realizing it. Maybe the alchemist has never been in love, the boy thought. The alchemist rode in front with the falcon on his shoulder. The bird knew the language of the desert well, and whenever they stopped, he flew off in search of game. On the first day he returned with a rabbit, and on the second with 2 birds. At night they spread their sleeping gear and kept their fires hidden. The desert nights were cold and were becoming darker and darker as phases of the moon passed. They went on for a week, speaking only of the precautions they needed to follow in order to avoid the battles between the tribes. The war continued, and at times the wind carried the sweet, sickly smell of blood. Battles had been fought nearby, and the wind reminded the boy that there was the language of omens, always ready to show him what his eyes had failed to observe. On the 7th day, the alchemist decided to make a camp earlier than usual. The falcon flew off to find game, and the alchemist offered his water container to the boy. "You're almost at the end of your journey," said the alchemist. "I congratulate you for having pursued your personal legend." "And you've told me nothing along the way," said the boy. "I thought you were going to teach me some of the things you know. A while ago I rode through the desert with a man who had books on alchemy, but I wasn't able to learn anything from them." "There is only one way to learn," the alchemist answered. "It's through action. Everything you need to know you have learned through your journey. You need to learn only one thing more." The boy wanted to know what that was, but the alchemist was searching the horizon looking for the falcon. "Why are you called the alchemist?" "Because that's what I am." "And what went wrong when the other alchemists tried to make gold and were unable to do so?" "They were only looking for gold," his companion answered. "They were seeking the treasure of their personal legend, without wanting actually to live out the personal legend." "What is it that I still need to know?" the boy asked. But the alchemist continued to look to the horizon, and finally the falcon returned with the meal. They dug a hole and lit their fire in it, so that the light of the flame would not be seen. "I am an alchemist simply because I am an alchemist," he said, as he prepared the meal. "I learned the science from my grandfather, who learned from his father, and so on, back to the creation of the world. In those times the master work could be written simply on an emerald. But men began to reject simple things, and to write tracks, interpretations, and philosophical this isn't a hard word, I know this word, philosophical studies. They also began to feel that they knew a better way than others had. Yet the emerald tablet is still alive today." "What was written on the emerald tablet?" the boy wanted to know. The alchemist began to draw in the sand, and completed his drawing in less than 5 minutes. As he drew, the boy thought of the old king, and the plaza where they had met that day. It seemed as if it had taken place years and years ago. "This is what was written on the emerald tablet," said the alchemist when he had finished. The boy tried to read what was written in the sand. "It's code," said the boy, a bit disappointed. "It looks like what I saw in the Englishman's books." "No," the alchemist said. "It's like the flight of those two hawks. It can't be understood by reason alone. The emerald tablet is a direct passage to the soul of the world. The wise men understood that this natural world is only an image and a copy of paradise. The existence of this world is simply a guarantee that there exists a world that is perfect. God created the world so that through its visible objects men could understand his spiritual teachings and the marvels of his wisdom. That's what I mean by action." "Should I understand the emerald tablet?" the boy asked. "Perhaps, if you were in a laboratory of alchemy. This would be the right time to study the best way to understand the emerald tablet. But you are in the desert, so immerse yourself in it. The desert will give you an understanding of the world. In fact, anything on the face of the earth will do that. You don't even have to understand the desert. All you have to do is contemplate a simple grain of sand, and you will see in it all the marvels of creation." "How do I immerse myself in the desert?" "Listen to your heart. It knows all things, because it came from the soul of the world, and it will one day return there." They crossed the desert for another 2 days in silence. The alchemist had become much more cautious, because they were approaching the area where the most violent battles were being waged. As they moved along, the boy tried to listen to his heart. It was not easy to do. In earlier times, his heart had always been ready to tell its story, but lately that wasn't true. There had been times when his heart spent hours telling him of sadness, and other times it became so emotional over the desert sunrise that the boy had to hide his tears. His heart beat fast when it spoke to the boy of treasure, and more slowly when the boy stared entranced at the endless horizons of the desert. But his heart was never quiet, even when the boy and the alchemist had fallen into silence. "Why do we have to listen to our hearts?" the boy asked, when they had made camp that day. "Because wherever your heart is, that is where you'll find your treasure." "But my heart is agitated," the boy said. "It has its dreams, it gets emotional, and it's become passionate over a woman of the desert. It asks things of me, and it keeps me from sleeping many nights when I'm thinking about her." "Well, that's good. Your heart is alive. Keep listening to what it has to say." During the next 3 days, the two travelers passed by a number of armed tribesmen and saw others on the horizon. The boy's heart began to speak of fear. It told him stories it had heard from the soul of the world, stories of men who sought to find the treasure and never succeeded. Sometimes it frightened the boy with the idea that he might not find his treasure, or that he might die there in the desert. At other times it told the boy that it was satisfied. It had found love and riches. "My heart is a traitor," the boy said to the alchemist when they had paused to rest the horses. "It doesn't want me to go on." "That makes sense," the alchemist said. "Naturally, it's afraid that in pursuing your dream, you might lose everything you've won." "Well, then why should I listen to my heart?" "Because you will never again be able to keep it quiet. Even if you pretend not to have heard what it tells you, it will always be there inside of you, repeating to you what you're thinking about life and about the world." "You mean I should listen even if it's treasonous?" "Treason is a blow that comes unexpectedly. If you know your heart well, it will never be able to do that. Because you'll know its dreams and its wishes, and will know how to deal with them. You will never be able to escape the fear. You will never be able to escape from your heart. So it's better to listen up to what it has to say. That way, you'll never have to fear an unanticipated blow." The boy continued to listen to his heart as they crossed the desert. He came to understand its dodges and its tricks, and to accept it as it was. He lost his fear and forgot about his need to go back to the oasis, because one afternoon his heart told him that it was happy. "Even though I complain sometimes," it said, "it's because I'm the heart of a person, and people's hearts are that way. People are afraid to pursue their most important dreams because they feel that they don't deserve them, or that they'll be unable to achieve them. We, their hearts, become fearful just thinking of loved ones who go away forever, or of moments that could have been good, but weren't, or of treasures that might have been found, but were forever hidden in the sands. Because when these things happen, we suffer terribly. My heart is afraid that it will have to suffer," the boy told the alchemist one night as they looked up at the moonless sky. "Tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself, and that no heart has ever suffered when it goes in search of its dreams, because every second of the search is a second's encounter with God and with eternity. Every second of the search is an encounter with God. When I have the boy told his heart, "When I have been truly searching for my treasure, every day has been luminous, because I've known that every hour was a part of the dream that I would find it. When I had been truly searching for my treasure, I've discovered things along the way I never would have seen, had I not had the courage to try things, and that seemed impossible for a shepherd to achieve." So his heart was quiet for an entire afternoon. That night, the boy slept deeply, and when he awoke, his heart began to tell him things that came from the soul of the world. It said that all people who are happy have God within them, and that happiness could be found in a grain of sand from the desert, as the alchemist had said. Because a grain of sand is a moment of creation, and the universe has taken millions of years to create it. Everyone on earth has a treasure that awaits them, his heart said. We, people's hearts, seldom say much about those treasures, because people no longer want to go in search of them. We speak of them only to children. Later, we simply let life proceed in its own direction, toward its own faith. But unfortunately, very few follow the path laid out for them, the path to their personal legends, and to their happiness. Most people see the world as a threatening place, and because they do, the world turns out indeed to be a threatening place. So we, their hearts, speak more and more softly. We never stop speaking out, but we begin to hope that our words won't be heard. We don't want people to suffer because they don't follow their hearts. Why don't people's hearts tell them to continue to follow their dreams? The boy asked the alchemist. Because that's what makes a heart suffer most, and hearts don't like to suffer. From then on, the boy understood his heart. He asked it, please never stop speaking to him. He asked that when he wandered far from his dreams, his heart press him and sound the alarm. The boy swore that every time he heard the alarm, he would heed its message. That night he told all of this to the alchemist, and the alchemist understood that the boy's heart had returned to the soul of the world. So what should I do now? The boy asked. Continue in the direction of the pyramids, said the alchemist, and continue to pay heed to the omens. Your heart is still capable of showing you where the treasure is. Is that the one thing I still needed to know? Said the boy. No, the alchemist answered. What you still needed to know is this. Before a dream is realized, the soul of the world tests everything that was learned along the way. It does this not because it's evil, but so we can, in addition to realizing our dreams, master the lessons we've learned as we've moved towards that dream. That's the point at which most people give up. It's the point at which, as we say in the language of desert, one dies of thirst just as the palm trees have appeared on the horizon. Every search begins with beginner's luck, and every search ends with the victors being severely tested. And the boy remembered an old proverb from his country. It said that the darkest hour of the night came just before the dawn. On the following day, the first clear sign of danger appeared. 3 armed tribesmen approached and asked what the boy and the alchemist were doing there. I'm hunting with my falcon, the alchemist answered. We're gonna have to search you to see whether you're armed, one of the tribesmen said. The alchemist dismounted slowly, and the boy did the same. Why are you carrying money? Asked the tribesman when he had searched the boy's bag. I need it to get to the pyramids, he said. The tribesmen who were searching the alchemist's belongings found a small crystal flask filled with the liquid, and a yellow glass egg that was slightly larger than a chicken's egg. What are these things? He asked. That's the philosopher's stone, and the elixir of life. It's the masterwork of the alchemist. Whoever swallows that elixir will never be sick again, and a fragment of that stone turns any metal into gold. The Arabs laughed at him, and the alchemist laughed along. They thought his answer was amusing, and they allowed the boy and the alchemist to proceed with all of their belongings. Are you crazy? The boy asked the alchemist when they had moved on. Why, what did you do that for? To show you one of life's simple lessons, the alchemist answered. When you possess great treasures within you, and you try to tell others of them, seldom are you believed. They continued across the desert. With every day that passed, the boy's heart became more and more silent. It no longer wanted to know about things of the past or the future. It was content simply to contemplate the desert and to drink with the boy from the soul of the world. The boy and his heart had become friends, and neither was capable now of betraying the other. When his heart spoke to him, it was to provide a stimulus to the boy and to give him strength, because the days of silence there in the desert were wearisome. His heart told the boy what his strongest qualities were: his courage in having given up his sheep and in trying to live out his personal legend, and his enthusiasm during the time he had worked at the crystal shop. And his heart had told him something else that the boy had never noticed. It told the boy of dangers that had threatened him, but that he had never perceived. His heart said that at one time it had hidden the rifle the boy had taken from his father, because of the possibility that the boy might wound himself, and it reminded the boy of the day when he had been ill and vomiting out in the fields, after which he had fallen into a deep sleep. There had been two thieves further ahead who were planning to steal the boy's sheep and murder him, but since the boy hadn't passed by, they had decided to move on, thinking that he had changed his route. "Does a man's heart always help him?" the boy asked the alchemist. "Mostly. Just the hearts of those who are trying to realize their personal legend. But they do help children, drunkards, and the elderly too." Does that mean I'll never run into danger?" the boy said. "It means only that the heart does what it can," the alchemist said. One afternoon they passed by the encampment of one of the tribes. At each corner of the camp were Arabs garbed in beautiful white robes, with arms at the ready. The men were smoking their hookahs and trading stories from the battlefield. No one paid any attention to the two travelers. "There's no danger," the boy said, when they had moved on past the encampment. The alchemist sounded angry. "Trust in your heart, but never forget that you are in the desert. When men are at war with one another, the soul of the world can hear the screams of battle. No one fails to suffer the consequences of everything under the sun." All things are one, the boy thought, and then, as if the desert wanted to demonstrate that the alchemist was right, two horsemen appeared from behind the travelers. "You can't go any further," one of them said. "You're in the area where the tribes are at war." "I'm not going very far," the alchemist answered, looking straight into the eyes of the horsemen. They were silent for a moment, and then agreed that the boy and the alchemist could move along. The boy watched the exchange with fascination. "You dominated those horsemen with the way you looked at them," he said. Your eyes showed the strength of your soul, answered the alchemist. That's true, the boy thought. He had noticed that in the midst of the multitude of armed men back at the encampment, there had been one who stared fixedly at the two. He had been so far away that his face wasn't even visible, but the boy was certain that he had been looking at them. Finally, when they had crossed the mountain range that extended along the entire horizon, the alchemist said that they were only 2 days from the pyramids. "If we're going to separate ways soon," the boy said, "then teach me about your alchemy." "You already know about alchemy. It is about penetrating into the soul of the world and discovering the treasure that has been reserved for you." No, that's not what I mean. I'm talking about transforming lead into gold," said the boy. The alchemist felt as silent as the desert and answered the boy only after they had stopped to eat. "Everything in the universe evolved," he said. "And for wise men, gold is the metal that evolved the furthest. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. I just know that the tradition is always right. Men have never understood the words of the wise. So gold, instead of being seen as a symbol of evolution, became the basis for their conflict. There are many languages spoken by things," the boy said. "There was a time for me when a camel's whinnying was nothing more than a whinnying. Then it became a signal of danger, and finally it became just a whinny again." But then he stopped. The alchemist probably already knew all that. "I have known true alchemists," the alchemist continued. They locked themselves in their laboratories and tried to evolve, as gold had. They found the philosopher's stone because they understood that when something evolves, everything around that thing evolves as well. Others stumbled upon the stone by accident. They already had the gift, and their souls were readier for such things than other souls of the world. But they don't count. They are quite rare. And then there were the others, who were interested only in gold. They never found the secret. They forgot that lead, copper, and iron have their own personal legends to fulfill, and anyone who interferes with the personal legend of another thing will never discover his own. The alchemist's words echoed out like a curse. He reached over and picked up a shell from the ground. "This desert was once a sea," he said. "I noticed that," the boy answered. The alchemist told the boy to place the shell over his hair. He had done that many times when he was a child, and had heard the sound of the sea. "The sea has lived on in this shell, because that's its personal legend, and it will never cease doing so until the desert is once again covered by the water." They mounted their horses and rode out in the direction of the pyramids of Egypt. The sun was setting when the boy's heart sounded a danger signal. They were surrounded by gigantic dunes, and the boy looked at the alchemist to see whether he had sensed anything, but he appeared to be unaware of any danger. 5 minutes later, the boy saw 2 horsemen waiting ahead of them. Before he could say anything to the alchemist, the 2 horsemen had become 10, and then 100, and then they were everywhere in the dunes. They were tribesmen dressed in blue, with black rings surrounding their turbans. Their faces were hidden behind blue veils, with only their eyes showing. Even from a distance, their eyes conveyed the strength of their souls, and their eyes spoke of death. The 2 were taken to a nearby military camp. A soldier shoved the boy and the alchemist into a tent where the chief was holding a meeting with his staff. "These are the spies," said one of the men. "We're just travelers," the alchemist answered. "You were seen at the enemy camp 3 days ago, and you were talking with one of the troops there." "I'm just a man who wanders the desert and knows the stars," said the alchemist. "I have no information about troops or about the movement of tribes. I was simply acting as a guide for my friend here." "Who's your friend?" the chief asked. "An alchemist," said the alchemist. "He understands the forces of nature, and he wants to show you his extraordinary powers." The boy listened quietly and fearfully. "What is a foreigner doing here?" asked another of the men. "He has brought money to give to your tribe," said the alchemist. Before the boy could say a word, and seizing the boy's bag, the alchemist gave the gold coins to the chief. The Arab accepted them without a word. There was enough there to buy a lot of weapons. "What is an alchemist?" he asked finally. "It's a man who understands the nature of the world. If he wanted to, he could destroy this camp just with the force of the wind." The men laughed. They were used to the ravages of war, and knew that the wind could not deliver them a fatal blow. Yet each felt his heart beat a bit faster. They were men of the desert, and they were fearful of sorcerers. "I want to see him do it," said the chief. "He needs 3 days," answered the alchemist. "He is going to transform himself into the wind, just to demonstrate his powers. If he can't do so, we humbly offer you our lives, for the honor of your tribe." "You can't offer me something that's already mine," the chief said arrogantly, but he granted the travelers 3 days. The boy was shaking with fear, but the alchemist helped him out the tent. "Don't let them see that you're afraid," the alchemist said. "They are brave men. They despise cowards." But the boy couldn't even speak. He was able to do so only after they had walked through the center of the camp. There was no need to imprison them. The Arabs simply confiscated their horses. So once again, the world has demonstrated its many languages. The desert only moments ago had been endless and free, and now it was an impenetrable wall. You gave them everything I had, the boy said. Everything I've saved my entire life. Well, what good would it be if you had to die? The alchemist said. Your money saved us for 3 days. It's not often that money saves a person's life. But the boy was so frightened to listen to the words of wisdom. He had no idea how he was going to transform himself into the wind. He wasn't an alchemist. The alchemist asked one of the soldiers for some tea and poured some onto the boy's wrists. A wave of relief washed over him, and the alchemist muttered some words that the boy didn't understand. Don't give in to your fears, said the alchemist, in a strangely gentle voice. If you do, you won't be able to talk to your heart. But I have no idea how to turn myself into the wind, said the boy. If a person is living out his personal legend, he knows everything he needs to know. There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve: the fear of failure. I'm not afraid of failing, it's just that I don't know how to turn myself into the wind, the boy says. Well, you'll have to learn. Your life depends on it. But what if I can't? Said the boy. Then you'll die in the midst of trying to realize your personal legend. That's a lot better than dying like millions of other people who never even knew what their personal legends were. But don't worry, the alchemist continued. Usually the threat of death makes people a lot more aware of their lives. The first day passed. There was a major battle nearby, and a number of wounded were brought back to the camp. The dead soldiers were replaced by others, and life went on. Death doesn't change anything, the boy thought. You could have died later on, a soldier said to the body of one of his companions. You could have died after peace had been declared, but in any case, you're going to die. At the end of the day, the boy went looking for the alchemist who had taken his falcon out into the desert. I still have no idea how to turn myself into the wind, the boy repeated. Remember what I told you. The world is only the visible aspect of God, and that what alchemy does is to bring spiritual perfection into contact with the material plane. What are you doing? The boy says. Feeding my falcon. If I'm not able to turn myself into the wind, we're going to die, the boy said. Why feed your falcon? You're the one who may die, the alchemist said. I already know how to turn myself into the wind. On the second day, the boy climbed to the top of a cliff near the camp. The sentinels allowed him to go. They had already heard about the sorcerer who could turn himself into the wind, and they didn't want to go near him. In any case, the desert was impassable. He spent the entire afternoon of the second day looking out over the desert and listening to his heart. The boy knew the desert sensed his fear. They both spoke the same language. On the third day, the chief met with his officers. He called the alchemist to the meeting and said, "Let's go see the boy who turns himself into the wind." "Let's," the alchemist answered. The boy took them to the cliff where he had been the previous day. He told them all to be seated. It's going to take a while," the boy said. "We're in no hurry," the chief answered. "We are men of the desert." The boy looked out at the horizon. There were mountains in the distance, and there were dunes, rocks, and plants that insisted on living where survival seemed impossible. There was the desert that he had wandered for so many months. Despite all that time, he only knew a small part of it. Within that small part, he had found an Englishman, caravans, tribal walls, an oasis with 50,000 palm trees and 300 wells. "What do you want here today?" the desert asked him. "Didn't you spend enough time looking at me yesterday?" "Somewhere you are holding the person I love," the boy said to the desert. "So when I look out over your sands, I am also looking at her. I want to return to her, and I need your help, so that I can turn myself into the wind." "What is love?" the desert asked. "Love is the falcon's flight over your sands, because for him you are a green field, from which he always returns with game. He knows your rocks, your dunes, your mountains, and you are generous to him." "The falcon's beak carries bits of me, myself," the desert said. "For years I care for his game, feeding it with the little water that I have, and then I show him where the game is. And one day, as I enjoy the fact that his game thrives on my surface, the falcon dives out of the sky and takes away what I've created." "But that's why you created the game in the first place," the boy answered. "To nourish the falcon, and the falcon then nourishes man, and eventually man will nourish your sands, where the game will once again flourish. That's how the world goes." "So, is this what love is?" said the desert. "Yes, that's what love is. It's what makes the game become the falcon become man, and man in turn the desert. It's what turns lead into gold, and makes the gold return to the earth." "I don't understand what you're talking about," the desert said. "But you can at least the boy says, "But you can at least understand that somewhere in your sands there is a woman waiting for me. And that's why I have to turn myself into the wind." The desert didn't answer him for a few moments. Then it told him, "I'll give you my sands to help the wind blow. But alone I can't do anything. You have to ask for help from the wind." A breeze began to blow. The tribesmen watched the boy from a distance, talking amongst themselves in a language that the boy couldn't understand. The alchemist smiled. The wind approached the boy and touched his face. It knew of the boy's talk with the desert, because the winds know everything. They blow across the world without a birthplace and with no place to die. "Help me," the boy said. "One day you carried the voice of my loved one to me." "Who taught you to speak the language of the desert and the wind?" says the wind. "My heart," the boy answered. The wind has many names. In that part of the world it was called the Sirocco, because it brought moisture from the oceans to the east. In the distant land the boy came from, they called it the Levanta, because they believed that it brought with it the sounds of the desert and the screams of the Moorish wars. Perhaps in the places beyond the pastures where his sheep lived, men thought that the wind came from Andalusia. But actually, the wind came from no place at all, nor did it go any place. That's why it was stronger than the desert. Someone might one day plant trees in the desert, and even raise sheep there, but never would they harness the wind." "You can't be the wind," the wind said. "We're two very different things." "That's not true," the boy said. "I learned the alchemist's secret in my travels. I have inside me the winds, the deserts, the oceans, the stars, and everything created in the universe. We were all made by the same hand, and we have the same soul. I want to be like you, able to reach every corner of the world, across the seas, blow away the sands that cover my treasure, and carry the voice of the woman I love." "I heard what you were talking about the other day with the alchemist," the wind said. "He said that everything has its own personal legend, but people can't turn themselves into the wind." "Just teach me to be the wind for a few moments," the boy said, "so you and I can talk about the limitless possibilities of people and the winds." The wind's curiosity was aroused, something that had never happened before. It wanted to talk about those things, but it didn't know how to turn a man into the wind. And look how many things in the wind already knew how to do. It created deserts, sank ships, felled entire forests, and blew through cities filled with music and strange noises. It felt that it had no limits. Yet here was a boy saying that there were other things that the wind should be able to do. This is what we call love, the boy said, seeing that the wind was close to granting what he requested. When you are loved, you can do anything in creation. When you are loved, there's no need at all to understand what's happening, because everything happens within you, and even men can turn themselves into the wind, as long as the wind helps, of course. The wind was a proud being, and it was becoming irritated with what the boy was saying. It commenced to blow harder, raising the desert sands. But finally it had to recognize that, even making its way around the world, it didn't know how to turn a man into the wind. And it knew nothing about love. In my travels around the world, I've often seen people speaking of love, and looking toward the heavens, the wind said, furious at having to acknowledge its own limitations. Maybe it's better to ask heaven. Well then, help me do that, the boy said. Fill this place with a sandstorm so strong that it blots out the sun. Then I can look to heaven without blinding myself. So the wind blew with all its strength, and the sky was filled with sand. The sun turned into a golden disk. At the camp it was difficult to see anything. The men of the desert were already familiar with the wind. They called it the simum, and it was worse than a storm at sea. Their horses cried out, and all their weapons were filled with sand. On the heights, one of the commanders turned to the chief and said, "Maybe we had better end this." They could barely see the boy. Their faces were covered with blue cloths, and their eyes showed fear. "Let's stop this," another commander said. "I want to see the greatness of Allah," the chief said, with respect. "I want to see how a man turns himself into the wind." But he made a mental note of the names of the two men who had expressed their fear. As soon as the wind stopped, he was going to remove them from his commands, because true men of the desert are not afraid. "The wind told me that you know about love," the boy said to the sun. "If you know about love, you must also know about the soul of the world, because it's made of love." "From where I am," the sun said, "I can see the soul of the world. It communicates with my soul, and together we cause the plants to grow and the sheep to seek out shade. From where I am, and I'm a long way from Earth, I learned how to love. I know that if I come even a little bit closer to the Earth, everything there would die, and the soul of the world will no longer exist. So we contemplate each other, and we want each other, and I give it life and warmth, and it gives me my reason for living." "So you know about love," the boy said. "And I know the soul of the world because we have talked at great length to each other during the endless trip through the universe. It tells me its greatest problem is that up until now, only the minerals and vegetables understand that all things are one. That there's no need for iron to be the same as copper, or copper to be the same as gold. Each performs its own exact function as a unique being, and everything would be a symphony of peace if the hand that wrote all this had stopped on the 5th day of creation. But there was a 6th day," the sun went on. "You are wise, because you observe everything from a distance," the boy said. "But you don't know about love. If there hadn't been a 6th day, man would not exist. Copper would always just be copper, and lead would just be lead. It's true that everything has its own personal legend, but one day that personal legend will be realized. So each thing has to transform itself into something better, and to acquire a new personal legend, until someday the soul of the world becomes one thing only." The sun thought about that, and decided to shine more brightly. The wind, which was enjoying the conversation, started to blow with greater force, so that the sun would not blind the boy. "This is why alchemy exists," the boy said, "so that everyone will search for his treasure, find it, and then want to be better than he was in his former life. Lead will play its role until the world has no further need for lead, and then lead will have to turn itself into gold. And that's what alchemists do. They show that when we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too. Well, why did you say that I don't know about love? The sun asked the boy. Because it's not love to be static like the desert, nor is it love to roam the world like the wind. And it's not love to see everything from a distance like you do. Love is the force that transforms and improves the soul of the world. When I first reached to it, I thought the soul of the world was perfect. But later I could see that it was like other aspects of creation, and had its own passions and wars. It is we who nourish the soul of the world, and the world we live in will either be better or worse depending on whether we become better or worse. And that's where the power of love comes in, because when we love, we always strive to become better than we are. So what do you want from me? The sun asked. I want you to help me to turn myself into the wind, the boy answered. Knows me as the wisest being in creation, the sun said, but I don't know how to turn you into the wind. Then whom should I ask? Said the boy. The sun thought for a moment. The wind was listening closely and wanted to tell every corner of the world that the sun's wisdom had its limitations, that it was unable to deal with the boy who spoke the language of the world. Speak to the hand that wrote all, said the sun. The wind screamed with delight and blew harder than ever. The tents were being blown from their ties to the earth, and the animals were being freed from their tethers. On the cliff, the men clutched at each other as they sought to keep from being blown away. The boy turned to the hand that wrote all. As he did so, he sensed that the universe had fallen silent, and he decided not to speak. A current of love rushed from his heart, and the boy began to pray. It was a prayer that he had never said before, because it was a prayer without words or pleas. His prayer didn't give thanks for his sheep having found new pastures. It didn't ask that the boy be able to sell more crystal, and it didn't beseech that the woman he had met continue to await his return. In the silence, the boy understood that the desert, the wind, and the sun were also trying to understand the signs written by the hand, and they were seeking to follow their paths and to understand what had been written on a single emerald. He saw that omens were scattered throughout the earth and in space, and that there were no reason or significance attached to their appearance. He could see that not the deserts, nor the winds, nor the sun, nor the people knew why they had been created, but that the hand had a reason for all of this, and that only the hand could perform miracles, or transform the sea into a desert, or a man into the wind, because only the hand understood that it was a larger design that had moved the universe to the point at which 6 days of creation had evolved into the masterwork. The boy reached through to the soul of the world and saw that it was part of the soul of God, and he saw that the soul of God was his own soul, and that he, a boy, could perform miracles. The simum blew that day as hard as it had ever blown. Sorry, I read that wrong. Let me start that again. The simum blew that day as it had never blown before. For generations thereafter, the Arabs recounted the legend of a boy who turned himself into the wind, almost destroying a military camp in the defiance of the most powerful chief in the desert. When the simum ceased to blow, everyone looked to the place where the boy had been, but he was no longer there. He was standing next to a sand-covered sentinel on the far side of the camp. The men were terrified at his sorcery, but there were 2 people who were smiling. The alchemist, because he had found his perfect disciple, and the chief, because that disciple had understood the glory of God. The following day, the general bade the boy and the alchemist farewell, and provided them with an escort party to accompany them as far as they chose. They rode for the entire day. Toward the end of the afternoon, they came upon a Coptic monastery. The alchemist dismounted and told the escorts they could return to the camp. From here on, you will be alone, the alchemist said. You are only 3 hours from the pyramids. Thank you, said the boy. You taught me the language of the world. I only invoked what you already knew. The alchemist knocked on the gate of the monastery, and a monk appeared dressed in black. They spoke for a few minutes in the Coptic tongue, and the alchemist bade the boy enter. I asked him to let me use the kitchen for a while, the alchemist said. They went to the kitchen at the back of the monastery. The alchemist lighted the fire, and the monk brought him some lead, which the alchemist placed in an iron pan. When the lead had become liquid, the alchemist took from his pouch the strange yellow egg. He scraped from it a sliver, as thin as hair, wrapped it in wax, and then added it to the pan in which the lead had melted. The mixture took on a reddish colour, almost the colour of blood. The alchemist removed the pan from the fire and set it aside to cool. As he did so, he talked with the monk about the tribal wars. I think they're going to last for a long time, he said to the monk. The monk was irritated. The caravans had been stopped at Giza for some time, waiting for the wars to end. But God's will be done, the monk said. Exactly, the alchemist answered. When the pan had cooled, the monk and the boy looked at it, dazzled. The lead had dried into the shape of the pan, but it was no longer lead. It was gold. Will I learn to do that someday? The boy asked. This was my personal legend, not yours, the alchemist answered. But I wanted to show you that it was possible. They returned to the gates of the monastery. There the alchemist separated the disc into 4 parts. This is for you, he said, holding one of the parts out to the monk. It's for your generosity to the pilgrims. But this payment goes well beyond my generosity, the monk responded. Don't say that again. Life might be listening, and give you less next time, said the alchemist. The alchemist turned to the boy. This is for you, to make up for what you gave to the general. The boy was about to say that it was much more than he had given the general, but he kept quiet because he had heard what the alchemist had said to the monk. And this is for me, said the alchemist, keeping one of the parts, because I have to return to the desert, where there are tribal wars. He took the 4th part and handed it to the monk. This is for the boy, if he ever needs it. But I'm going in search of my treasure, the boy said. I'm very close to it now. And I'm certain you'll find it, the alchemist said. Then why this? Says the boy. Because you have already lost your savings twice, once to the thief and once to the general. I'm an old superstitious Arab, and I believe in proverbs. There's one that says everything that happens once can never happen again, but everything that happens twice will surely happen a 3rd time. They mounted their horses. I want to tell you a story about dreams, said the alchemist. The boy brought his horse closer. In ancient Rome, at the time of the Emperor Tiberius, there lived a good man who had 2 sons. One was in the military and had been sent to the most distant regions of the empire. The other was a poet and delighted all of Rome with his beautiful verses. One night the father had a dream. An angel appeared to him and told him that the words of one of his sons would be learned and repeated throughout the world for all generations to come. The father woke from his dream grateful and crying, because life was generous and had revealed to him something any father would be proud to know. Shortly thereafter, the father died as he tried to save a child who was about to be crushed by the wheels of a chariot. Since he had lived his entire life in a manner that was correct and fair, he went directly to heaven, where he met the angel that had appeared in his dream. You were always a good man, said the angel to him. You lived your life in a loving way, and died with dignity. I can now grant you any wish you desire. Life was good to me, said the man. When you appeared in my dreams, I felt that all my efforts had been rewarded, because my son's poems will be read by men for generations to come. I don't want anything for myself, but any father would be proud of the fame achieved by one whom he had cared for as a child and educated as he grew up. Sometime in the distant future, I would like to see my son's words. The angel touched the man's shoulder, and they were both projected far into the future. They were in an immense setting, surrounded by thousands of people speaking a strange language. The man wept with happiness. I knew that my son's poems were immortal, he said to the angel through his tears. Can you please tell me which of my son's poems these people are repeating? The angel came closer to the man, and with tenderness led him to a bench nearby, where they sat down. The verses of your son, who was a poet, were very popular in Rome, the angel said. Everyone loved them and enjoyed them. But when the reign of Tiberius ended, his poems were forgotten. The words you're hearing now are those of your son in the military. The man looked at the angel in surprise. Your son went to serve at a distant place and became a centurion. He was just and good. One afternoon, one of his servants fell ill, and it appeared that he would die. Your son had heard of a rabbi who was able to cure illnesses, and he rode out for days and days in search of this man. Along the way, he learned that the man he was seeking was a son of God. He met others who had been cured by him, and they instructed your son. He had met others who had been cured by him, and they instructed your son in the man's teachings. And so, despite the fact that he was a Roman centurion, he converted to their faith. Shortly thereafter, he reached the place where the man he was looking for was visiting. He told the man that one of his servants was gravely ill, and that the rabbi made ready to go to his house with him. But the centurion was a man of faith, and looking into the eyes of the rabbi, he knew that he was surely in the presence of the Son of God. And this is what your son said. The angel told the man. These are the words he said to the rabbi at that point, and they have never been forgotten. My Lord, I am not worthy that you come under my roof, but only speak a word, and my servant will be healed. The alchemist said, no matter what he does, every person on earth plays a central role in the history of the world, and normally he doesn't know it. The boy smiled. He had never imagined that questions about life would be of such importance to a shepherd. Goodbye, the alchemist said. Goodbye, said the boy. Alrighty, I think it's time we take another break. There's not much left of the book. He is about 3 hours away from the pyramids, and he has just said goodbye to the alchemist. So I hope you guys are enjoying the book so far. It's one of my favorite books, the best book I've ever read. Oh, and it's so relaxing. Oh, I'm really enjoying it. It's really, really good to do. But anyway, we're going to do a little break now. Be right back. Take 5 minutes to go to the bathroom, grab yourself a drink, grab yourself a snack, maybe do some push-ups, whatever you want. Now's the time to do it. I'll see you in 5-ish minutes. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed that little break, little bathroom break before we finish off the book. Go. The boy rode along the desert for several hours, listening avidly to what his heart had to say. It was his heart that would tell him where his treasure was hidden. Where your treasure is hidden, there will also be your heart, the alchemist had told him. But his heart was speaking of other things. With pride, it told the story of a shepherd who had left his flock to follow his dream he had on 2 different occasions. It told of a personal legend, and of many men who had wandered in search of distant lands or beautiful women, confronting the people of their times with their preconceived notions. It spoke of journeys, discoveries, books, and change. As he was about to climb yet another dune, his heart whispered, "Be aware of the place where you are brought to tears. That's where I am. That's where your treasure is." The boy climbed the dune slowly. A full moon rose again in the starry sky. It had been a month since he had set forth from the oasis. The moonlight cast shadows through the dunes, creating the appearance of a rolling sea. It reminded the boy of the day when that horse had reared in the desert, and he had come to know the alchemist. And the moon fell on the desert silence, and on a man's journey in search of his treasure. When he reached the top of the dune, his heart leapt. There, illuminated by the light of the moon and the brightness of the desert, stood the solemn and majestic pyramids of Egypt. The boy fell to his knees and wept. He thanked God for making him believe in his personal legend, and for leading him to meet a king, a merchant, an Englishman, and an alchemist. And above all, for having met a woman of the desert who had told him that love would never keep a man from his personal legend. If he wanted to, he could now return to the oasis, go back to Fatima, and live his life as a simple shepherd. After all, the alchemist continued to live in the desert, even though he understood the language of the world, and knew how to transform lead into gold. He didn't need to demonstrate his science and art to anyone. The boy told himself that, and on the way toward realizing his own personal legend, he had learned all he needed to know, and had experienced everything he might have dreamed of. But here he was, at the point of finding his treasure, and he reminded himself that no project is completed until its objective has been achieved. The boy looked at the sands around him, and saw that where his tears had fallen, a scarab beetle was scuttling through the sand. During his time in the desert, he had learned that in Egypt, the scarab beetles were a symbol of God. Another omen! The boy began to dig into the dune. As he did so, he thought of what the crystal merchant had once said, that anyone could build a pyramid in his backyard. The boy could see now that he couldn't do so if he placed stone upon stone for the rest of his life. Throughout the night, the boy dug at the place he had chosen, but found nothing. He felt weighted down by the centuries of time since the pyramids had been built. But he didn't stop. He struggled to continue digging as he fought the wind, which often blew the sand back into the excavation. His hands were abraded and exhausted, but he listened to his heart. It had told him to dig where his tears fell. As he was attempting to pull out the rocks he encountered, he heard footsteps. Several figures approached him. Their backs were to the moonlight, and the boy could see neither their eyes nor their faces. "What are you doing here?" one of the figures demanded. Because he was terrified, the boy didn't answer. He had found where his treasure was, and was frightened at what might happen. "We're refugees from the tribal wars, and we need money," the other figure said. "What are you hiding there?" "I'm not hiding anything," the boy answered. But one of them seized the boy and yanked him back out of the hole. Another who was searching the boy's bags found the piece of gold. "There's gold here," he said. The moon shone on the face of the Arab who had seized him, and in the man's eyes the boy saw death. "He's probably got more gold hidden in the ground." Then made the boy continue digging, but he found nothing. As the sun rose, the men began to beat the boy. He was bruised and bleeding. His clothing was torn to shreds, and he felt that death was near. What good is money to you if you're going to die? It's not that often money can save someone's life, the alchemist had said. Finally, the boy screamed at the men, I'm digging for treasure! And although his mouth was bleeding and swollen, he told his attackers that he had twice dreamed of a treasure hidden near the pyramids of Egypt. The man who appeared to be the leader of the group spoke to one of the others. Leave him. He doesn't have anything else. He must have stolen the gold. The boy fell to the sand, nearly unconscious. The leader shook him and said, We're leaving. But before they left, he came back to the boy and said, You're not going to die. You'll live. And you'll learn that a man shouldn't be so stupid. 2 years ago, right here on this spot, I had a recurrent dream too. I dreamed that I should travel to the fields of Spain and look for a ruined church where shepherds and their sheep sleep. In my dream, there was a sycamore growing out there in the ruins of the scarcity. And I was told that if I dug at the roots of the sycamore, I would find a hidden treasure. But I'm not stupid to cross the entire desert just because of a recurrent dream. And they disappeared. The boy stood up shakily, looked once more at the pyramids. They seemed to laugh at him, and he laughed back, his heart bursting with joy, because now he knew where his treasure was. And this is the epilogue. The boy reached the small abandoned church just as night was falling. The sycamore was still there in the sacristy, I think that's how you pronounce it, sacristy, and the stars could still be seen through the half-destroyed roof. He remembered the time he had been there with his sheep. It had been a peaceful night, except for the dream. Now he was here, not with his flock, but with a shovel. He sat looking at the sky for a long time. Then he took from his knapsack a bottle of wine and drank some. He remembered the night in the desert when he had sat with the alchemist as they looked at the stars and drank wine together. He thought of the many roads he had travelled and of the strange way God had chosen to show him his treasure. If he hadn't believed in the significance of recurrent dreams, he would not have met the gypsy woman, the king, the thief, or, well, it's a long list. But the path was written in the omens, and there was no way I could go wrong, he said to himself. He fell asleep, and when he awoke, the sun was already high. He began to dig at the base of the sycamore. You old sorcerer, the boy shouted out to the sky. You knew the whole story. You even left a bit of gold at the monastery so I could get back to this church. The monk laughed when he saw me come back in tatters. Couldn't you have saved me from that? No, he heard from a voice in the wind. If I had told you, you wouldn't have seen the pyramids. They're beautiful, aren't they? The boy smiled and continued digging. Half an hour later, his shovel hit something solid. An hour later, before him, a chest of Spanish gold coins. There were also precious stones, gold masks adorned with red and white feathers, and stone statues embedded with jewels, the spoils of a conquest that the country had long ago forgotten, and that some conquistador had failed to tell his children about. The boy took out Urim and Thummim from his bag. He had used the two stones only once, one morning when he was at the marketplace. His life and his path had always provided him with enough omens. He placed Urim and Thummim in the chest. They were also part of his new treasure, because they were a reminder of the old king, whom he would never see again. It's true, life really is generous to those who pursue their personal legend, the boy thought. Then he remembered that he had to get to Tarifa so he could give 1/10 of his treasure to the gypsy woman, as he had promised. Those gypsies are really smart, he thought. Maybe it was because they moved around so much. The wind began to blow again. It was the Levanta, the wind that came from Africa. It didn't bring with it the smell of the desert, nor the threat of Moorish invasion. Instead, it brought the scent of a perfume he knew well, and the touch of a kiss that came from far away. Slowly, slowly, until it rested on his lips. The boy smiled. It was the first time she had done that. I'm coming, Fatima, he said. And that's The Alchemist. Ooh, I really enjoyed reading that. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to it. A lot of life lessons in there. A lot of growth. A lot of self-reflection. A lot of good stuff. But yes, that was me finally completing The Alchemist, which I had started a while ago. And like we learned from the book, you go when you go and you stop when you stop. You go with the flow of life and you trust. You trust God's plan. He is the one that writes it all. So on that note, I shall leave it here. Thank you all for joining. For those of you who did join, if you do watch this back later, I hope you enjoyed. Please do like, subscribe, all that jazz if you want to. Otherwise, that's me for today. Or maybe for now. Maybe I'll come back for another stream later. I'm still deciding. Go with the flow. Anyway, hope you guys have an amazing evening. Take care. Love you all. Peace. Bye.